I love being introduced by success stories, right? No road, and then EXIM comes and there's a road. It's great. So we're here, and this is about cultural diplomacy, but I'm going to take you into the commercial aspect of cultural diplomacy, and actually I'm going to bring you into a very, very unique universe, which is the universe of export credit financing. Thank you, Ambassador. So I am a principal here at Squire Patton Boggs. I began in January, and I'm in the financial services practice. I came to Washington in the Obama administration to serve as General Counsel of the Export-Import Bank, and I was serving in that capacity until September. And I think, as you all know, EXIM is, as we call it, EXIM, is the official export credit agency of the United States. And basically what that means is that they're supposed to, we the bank, are supposed to finance U.S. exports in order to create jobs in the United States. So what the bank does is basically deal with all of the major exporters of the United States, such as Boeing and General Electric and Dow Chemical and Caterpillar and all sorts of companies that you know and are aware of, and basically identify transactions annually in the billions of dollars that are cross-border transactions, primarily in the area of infrastructure, and that is really nowadays primarily energy, telecommunications, and transportation. And just to be clear, what EXIM does is that the bank provides financing to the foreign country, to the foreign government, to the foreign company, in order to enable that government or company to purchase U.S. goods and services. So in connection with that, my experience at the bank, I also worked on several presidential initiatives, and I'm just going to briefly touch on them so that you have an idea of the fact that in addition to the financing, the bank does get involved in a lot of the major presidential initiatives. So in the administration of Obama, I was involved in the climate change effort. And in connection with that, led the team that basically established the environmental and social guidelines for financing of projects throughout the world. Also participated in the Tilt to Asia. So in that capacity, I led our engagement with the Ministry of Finance of China in the sovereign guarantee loan program that EXIM Bank has with China. And I can put more detail. I can put more detail into any of this, but I don't want to turn this into a classroom on export finance. Also worked on opening Burma. We did the first financing in Myanmar, and also worked on Cuba. As you probably heard, my nickname is Manana. My name is Ángela Mariana Freyre. I'm Cuban. And actually in the Obama administration, I served as special advisor for Cuba policy in the National Security Council, and was leading the interagency group, Treasury, State, and Commerce, implementing the new policy, and led the government-to-government negotiations. So back to EXIM for a few facts. EXIM is an independent agency. It is part of the executive branch, but it is authorized by Congress, all of which, as you can imagine, creates a tension. But it is not an instrument of foreign policy, and it really does operate like a bank. In other words, it looks at a transaction and it looks at the credit worthiness of the borrower and performs a credit underwriting analysis before it commits to financing. The EXIM carries the full faith and credit of the United States. So when the United States makes a loan, when EXIM Bank makes a loan, that obligation is the U.S. government's obligation, and the U.S. Treasury stands behind it. In addition, I think it's very important to understand that we do not compete with the private sector. The Export-Import Bank only finances where the private sector is unwilling or unable to finance. In other words, Tajikistan Airlines wants to buy a Boeing plane. Well, you can go to HSBC or you can go to JP Morgan Chase. You can go to Citibank and you will be told, we do not have a portfolio for Tajikistan, or we're maxed out in our aircraft portfolio. So that's where EXIM Bank is ideal, because we step in, and if that Tajik airline is creditworthy and meets the underwriting standards, then EXIM Bank is there to provide the financing, and we're not crowding out the private sector because they were either unable or unwilling to go into that market. And most of EXIM Bank's financing comes in the form of guarantees of private loans made by commercial banks. But EXIM is a complex institution, and we could go on and on about the OECD, because it's a member of the OECD that sets minimum standards for tenor and the financing terms. Or we could talk about the fact that EXIM has 3 mandates. One mandate in sub-Saharan Africa, another mandate to fund small business, another mandate for renewables. But I just want to leave you with basically 2 thoughts here. When the Export-Import Bank becomes fully functional, it will be able to provide financing for foreign governments and foreign companies that are interested in buying U.S. goods and services. The second thought is there are over 85 export credit agencies throughout the world. We're not the only ones. And having an export credit agency is important not only because of the way that an export credit agency can enhance the power of exports for a country, but it's also important because an export credit agency can also attract U.S. companies to come into your country and manufacture in your country. Like, for example, right now, we've seen that General Electric has opened up manufacturing plants in Italy to make generators in Italy, and they're using the Italian export credit agency, SACE, in order to finance the sale of their generators. Or Boeing, for example, that has opened up manufacturing plants in Canada and is taking advantage of EDC financing. EDC is a Canadian export credit agency. EDC financing in order to sell their engines. So it's a very, very important part of success to develop an export credit strategy with an export credit agency in order to achieve that success in the global economy. And here, actually, at Squire Patton Boggs, we're very well placed in order not only to help you gain access to EXIM financing for your country and your country's companies, but also to help develop an export credit strategy for a country, including rules of the game for the export credit agency. And I guess that I should finally address, I don't know how familiar you are with the Export-Import Bank, but the question that everybody in this town asks is, what's happening with the board of directors? Thank you, Mike. It's taken time, but the President of the United States nominated 5 individuals to the board of directors. Those 5 individuals had a hearing in the Senate Banking Committee, and 4 of those individuals were sent to the Senate for action. So we are just waiting for the President of the United States to nominate a chairman and president for the bank. And I feel confident that I don't want to say in the near term, but in the foreseeable future, we will have a functioning board and we will be back in business. And with that, I'll open it up to questions, and thank you.
Thank you, madam. My name is Fabian. I'm from Sweden. We look very much at ethics. How do you tackle ethical ethics?
Ethics.
Business ethics. And are you worried about the Chinese EXIM? They are invading everywhere, particularly building infrastructure. Now, Serbia, everything, etc. They are in Europe, they are around the States. In the States, they have come in where you have certain barriers. We in Europe are learning from the US to see what way we can still protect our own businesses to make the same job. How worried one should be? Is it exaggerated? Or is EXIM really working on this? And when you come across ethical issues, ethics in business, how have you handled the countries that are maybe run by dictatorships and so with big money? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. It's excellent, and the answer is both simple and complex. I personally do not engage in China bashing because, I'll tell you the honest truth, I like China. I've spent the last 7 years of my life working with the Chinese, in particular the China EXIM and the Ministry of Finance and the NDRC. That basically does the planning for the country, and I have a great deal of respect for my Chinese colleagues. China's aggressive, but China's on the rise, and people who are on the rise tend to be aggressive. China EXIM in 1 year, I think it was 2015, did more financing in that 1 year than we did in the 80 years of our existence. 80 years of our existence. Okay? Yes. Because we have limits in US EXIM. We're not able to finance anything anywhere. There are risk limitations and so on. But I believe that what is important is that we arrive at understandings with China as to what the rules of the game should be. This isn't about bashing, and it isn't about complaining that they're everywhere and undercutting everyone. And it's true, they are everywhere, and it's true, they are undercutting everyone. But we need to, I see China becoming more responsible over time. I see them changing in terms of their practices, whereas there was a time when they would not consider the environmental and social impact of a power project. Now they are considering environmental and social impacts of a project and displacements of ethnicities. China is changing, and the key is engaging with China to make sure that we come to an understanding of what the rules of the game should be. So I am concerned, but I also see things are progressing in the right direction. And I don't think, unfortunately, that politically, whether it's here or in China or in Europe, I don't feel that we're in a place where we're willing to engage with each other to move the agenda forward in the way that it should be moved. And then just to finish the thought, the OECD, where your country's ECA and we are members, has it's an institution of beauty because it arrives at their decisions by consensus. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years. But when they get there, it is a beautiful quality project. And they're working on foreign corrupt practices and ethics and all, and countries like yours and mine are bringing to those discussions, their best standards. And it's actually working. I don't see China joining the OECD anytime soon. But I think we should be engaging and not bashing, because they are moving in the right direction.
Do we have some more questions? Yeah, two ladies.
Hi.
Yeah, you can start.
Okay. My name is Amara. I'm a recent graduate of the LBJ School in Austin. My question has to do with when you're dealing with a country not like China, a country that's much smaller, that you mentioned Burma or Myanmar. When the dynamic changes internally in terms of ethics, like it has recently under Obama in the early 2016, there was quite a big shift in opening up. But now there is kind of a different, we're learning more about the regime that exists. And having already engaged in a country like that, what type of implications does that have for your work?
So it depends on the evolution on the ground. It could have an effect on the financing. Political change sometimes does, and certainly when political change engenders commercial change, it can have a big impact. But generally speaking, we are not a tool of foreign policy at all. So we don't look at we don't look at Burma. Well, we look at Burma, Myanmar at the time that we're doing the financing, and we kind of look at the landscape and figure out whether we should be lending into that landscape. But once that decision has been taken, we are like a commercial bank. We just stick to it, because we're the U.S. government. We can't say yes and then in the middle change the. We need to behave like a commercial bank and be there for the duration of the tenor of the loan. And it's a really good question, because it's a question. It's a problem that's used a lot, for example, in Cuba. How should we be engaging with Cuba? So there's the school of thought that says engage because you're helping the people. I'm not passing judgment on the Cuban government. I'm there to help the people move forward and to give them options. Or the other school of thought that says don't engage because the government is unacceptable. I tend to fall in the category of engage, and I think that most banks and EXIM Bank also tend to fall in the let's take the politics away, okay? Does this deal make sense? Does that road that we're building in Croatia make commercial sense? Does this airport that we're financing, and what we're financing really is infrastructure. I mean, the vast majority of what we do is energy, transportation, and telecommunication infrastructure. It's to enable people to communicate, to enable people to move. And to enable people to have power for their activities. So, to the extent that you are in the infrastructure level, you can let the political argument fall to the side, and just focus on your commercial loan. Now, again, there are political developments that would jeopardize a loan and therefore affect the credit. But what's happened in Myanmar on the human rights level has not affected the loans in the country.
I think we have time just for one more question, because we need to allow to the.
This should have been a class on export credit financing.
Just kind of an extension of her question, but with a look at the three tiers of mandate that are mandated. So with renewable, small business, and
Sub-Saharan Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa, how do those all play in together? And if we have economic sanctions, or if there are, other sanctions from the international community, how does that play into those investments, and what are the trends that we're seeing?
Good, that's a good, yeah. So these three mandates are all separate. So it's a small business, we're supposed to make financing available to U.S. small businesses to export. That, you have no idea the stories that I could tell you. There was a pickle producer in Pennsylvania that was sending boatloads of pickles to China. I mean, they loved her pickles, in any event. So a small business, sub-Saharan Africa is huge for us, as is the renewable. We do a tremendous amount of work in wind and solar. Those mandates they flow through. We have teams that develop, do business development in those particular areas. And the last part of your question?
The countries that may have economic sanctions.
Oh, yes,
From
yeah.
our country.
Of course, I repressed your question because I repressed your questions because sanctions are not something that I embrace. I should say I don't embrace sanctions, but I do prefer sanctions to war. That said, we're absolutely squarely within the executive branch, and we're subject to all, whether it's Iranian, Cuban, North Korean, we're subject to all of the sanctions regimes. So we are closed in Cuba, we're closed in North Korea, we're closed in Iran. So we are unable to provide financing under whatever the applicable sanctions regime is. And we have, obviously, Venezuela is another problem now. But there is we have what's called a country limitation schedule that basically sets forth the risk profile of each country of the world, and whether we're opened or closed, and whether we're opened or closed in public and private sector. Thank you very much. It's been great.